Well, good evening and welcome. It's really a pleasure to welcome you. And let me start by acknowledging the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples on whose unceded traditional territories we are, of course, privileged to gather this evening. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first in the 2017-18 President's Faculty Lecture Series. I want to thank you for joining us for what promises, now normally I say what promises to be an evening of big ideas, but I think I'm going to say of wild ideas tonight. Hopefully you know by now that SFU has made it our mission to be Canada's most community-engaged research university. And in furtherance of that mission, one of our programs, this one, is designed to really provide the community a chance to hear from some of our faculty members who are doing really exciting work. And tonight's speaker certainly fits that bill. The idea being, of course, that if you hear from us and we hear back from you, we will both benefit from the exchange. And I want you to know there will be an opportunity after today's lecture for you to ask questions and have comment. And then indeed, after the lecture, there's some modest refreshments at the back, and you're welcome to stay, and Rudy's kindly agreed to stay and have some conversation as well. I should also tell you that either warn you or excite you by telling you that this lecture will be filmed for and available on our SFU YouTube channel. And I say that because if you do ask a question, that means you may become a YouTube star yourself in the process. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. And I'm so appreciative that Dr. Rudy Reimer-Younks is who's an associate professor of archaeology and First Nations studies, has agreed to be our first speaker of this series. He's a member of the Squamish Nation. He joined SFU in 1994 and has been studying and sharing the history of the Squamish Nation and other Indigenous peoples for over 2 decades. He became interested in archaeology and the past by listening to his grandfather and other community elders' stories about Squamish Nation history. He earned a degree at Capilano College, now known as Capilano University, before coming to SFU to study his master's in archaeology. And after earning his master's at SFU and consulting, he then went on to earn his doctorate in archaeology at McMaster University. He was, by the way, an important part of the team working on Squamish Nation land use planning and other initiatives while consulting, and furthered his knowledge in that endeavor as well. His research explores the connection between cultural knowledge and science. He's been featured in television documentaries, and I want to see this one, because it says including a documentary on Discovery Channel on Bigfoot. Is that right? Wow. Something for us all to check out and look forward to. He is perhaps better known as the host of Wild Archaeology, the series that has been airing on Aboriginal Peoples Television Network and just started filming its 2nd season this summer. And I want to tell you, we hosted a big event last spring, the Community University Expo. Had over 500 people from across the country here to talk about university community engagement. And I had someone come up to me and said, "Do you know Rudy Reimer?" And I said, "Yeah, he's a faculty member." "Oh, is there any chance I could meet him? I watch all of his shows." And I said, "Well, if he's here, I'll introduce you." As it happened, Rudy didn't connect, but I don't know, maybe you're there tonight, the person who raised this. So Rudy is truly a TV star as well as a professor and researcher. And if you haven't seen it, and after tonight's lecture, you'll want to see Wild Archaeology. It is the first documentary television series in the world that explores the archaeological record of Canada's Indigenous peoples from the point of view of Indigenous peoples, and shines important light on that knowledge and enables those of us who aren't Indigenous to learn an awful lot we couldn't learn in any other way. In addition to being a TV star, Rudy, of course, publishes. He's published numerous articles, supervised several master's students, and we're so pleased, Rudy, that you've taken time from your busy schedule and TV shoot to present this lecture. So please join with me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Rudy Reimer-Younks. Rudy.
Wachika, President Petter, Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's kind of nice to hear all the things that you've done over the many, many years. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for coming. It's pretty much a full crowd here. We might need some new chairs if more people come in. So that's really, really good. So yes, I'm gonna take off my jacket. I've been walking around downtown Vancouver with various appointments today. I was on CBC Radio, and just want to be a little more comfortable. So, wild archaeology. Just a quick show of hands. Who has watched or seen the show? Okay, so roughly about half. Okay, the half of you who didn't put up your hand, hopefully after this evening, you will go on to APTN's website, Wild Archaeology, and you can binge watch all 13 episodes. They're only 22 minutes long, so it's just like Netflix. And as President Petter alluded to, we've started filming season 2 this past summer, and we will continue filming next summer, spring, summer, and fall. And then there will be another year of post-production. So it's exciting, it's happening, but unfortunately, you'll have to wait a little longer for season 2. So yeah, the reason why I got involved in this, I got a phone call from our producer-director, Tracy German of Pale Fox Pictures in Toronto. I was sitting in my office after teaching one of my classes, and I was getting ready to go home, and she called me up and said, "Would you like to be on a TV show?" And I said, "Maybe." As it just happened, back in 2011, I was getting ready to fly back to McMaster to defend my dissertation. So we had a meeting in Toronto, Pearson Airport, put some ideas down on paper. That following spring, we filmed a teaser up in Squamish, sent that off to APTN. We waited and waited, and then they said, "We like it. Go ahead, film a full 13-episode season." And so I got really excited then because, as Andrew mentioned, this is the first TV show anywhere that incorporates in a meaningful way the perspectives of Indigenous peoples, their history and archaeology. And so for me, back in my MA days at SFU in archaeology, my fellow grad students and I, we sat in the pub going, "Oh yeah, it'd be really cool to make a good archaeology TV show," and here it is. So let's get into more of the serious things. Well, you might be asking the question to yourself, well, what is Indigenous archaeology? Good colleague up at SFU, George Nicholas, if you want to read into this more, I asked permission to use the cover of this book tonight. I've got a chapter in there as well. It's stories of Indigenous archaeologists from around the world. So what is Indigenous archaeology? How is it different than conventional archaeology that you may have been exposed to? Well, loosely defined, archaeology, it's the archaeology done with, by, and for Indigenous communities. And so this doesn't just include participation in field work, in excavations and surveys. It's the care for ancestral remains, be they human remains or artifacts and other things, and other elements of Indigenous cultural heritage, such as oral history, language, place names, and so on. And this Indigenous archaeology has only arisen within the discipline over the last 20 to 30 years. Prior to that, much of the archaeology that was done across North America was without the consent of First Nations communities or Native American communities in the United States. And there was heavy critique from those communities about archaeology and what archaeologists were doing. And so the good thing of any academic discipline is to listen and learn and change. And so many archaeologists start going, we have to change our practice, how we do things, why we do things. And up until where we are now in modern day, I see many of my good colleagues here, John, Dave, many others in the department at SFU, practice various forms of Indigenous archaeology, where it's the communities who are setting the research agenda. And this, I think, fulfills the engagement part of SFU, how we meaningfully engage with communities. And so, yeah, it's moving beyond basic consultation. It's forming true collaborations. And it allows Indigenous designed projects to explore that community's heritage. And so this is something I do within Squamish Nation community, and I've done a little bit with other communities across British Columbia and beyond. And so what's really exciting in the last 5-10 years is that Indigenous archaeology is not just an academic thing anymore. Our students are taking up on this, and they're going on into cultural resource management or the business side of archaeology and implementing the philosophy of Indigenous archaeology in business practice. We have an MA in heritage resource management now. And again, John Welch is a strong steerer of that. And so over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of change within the discipline, and this will continue on. And it's really exciting to be part of that. There's even a coalition of Indigenous archaeologists across North America that was started back, estimated in 2010. And this was a result of Indigenous archaeologists meeting at national conferences and sort of talking in back rooms going, how are we going to change things? And so, well, I've got it. We all have our own ideas. And so my way of doing Indigenous archaeology as well, it's something I experience when I talk to my home community and I talk about archaeology, and people are scratching their head and going, what are you talking about? And so it's, for me, this TV show is bringing archaeology to a broader audience and moving away from some of the technical talk that we do in academia and reaching out to a much larger audience than we would ever hope to have through publications in academic journals and books. So yeah, wild archaeology, why? These are some of the reasons that I got involved in it. I wanted to focus on science of archaeology as well, but also stress the First Nations community's perspectives, have their voices, their knowledge and experience to show this is archaeology by, with, and for those people. And really looking, we think about archaeology as pre-history. Well, I think of it as deep history. There's no disconnect there. And really stressing the values of cultural knowledge, place names, language, traditions, and so on. And so for me, Wild Archaeology as a TV series is Indigenous archaeology in a new form. It's media. It's reaching out to a much larger audience. And so, yeah, here we are filming the teaser back in 2011. That's my cousin Hetselam, or Dustin Rivers. He was originally supposed to be one of the hosts. And there's Jennifer Brusso, one of the other co-hosts, and the film crew. Hetselam decided to back out before we started filming season 1 because he wanted to revitalize the Squamish language. And he is doing that through SFU as well. Here at Harbour Centre, one of my other cousins here, Aaron, has played a part in that as well. And it's really exciting. And so that's very good to see. But once we did the teaser, again, there was money became available when the APTN said we'd like it. And so that allowed us to go from coast to coast to coast across the country, filming 13 episodes in 2014 and 15. And so one of the other reasons what inspired me to do this was looking on TV, you turn on to History Channel or Discovery or other stations and you see all these kind of shows. Well, an archaeologist and a filmmaker, Pepe and Zarniski, teamed up, and they actually wrote a book about making archaeological documentaries. And their text was a good start to show, well, how do we disseminate archaeological information through media, such as TV? Well, their book, I found it to be pretty practical, but it was kind of a repetitive guide of how to do an archaeology TV show. And they really stressed, well, the filmmaker and the archaeologist had to work creatively together. And it's like, well, that kind of goes without saying if you want to make any production. Yeah, their book, I found it to be very repetitive. It didn't even touch on the ethics of going into communities and talking about their cultural knowledge. And they could have used some case examples in their book. And I was like, so before the filming of the first season, these were the things that were going through my head. And it's like, how do we do an ethically sound yet informative TV show that respects cultural knowledge and focuses on the science of archaeology? And so going into the filming, these were the things, the concerns that I had going on. And every location that we went to, every community is different. Every set is different. The weather changes and so on. So who's involved in this? Well, for those of you who've seen this show, you know this, but I'll introduce some of the people. Of course, I am one of the hosts. This is me doing some of my research, and there's President Petter and I at another event last year. So yeah, I'm the main archaeologist on the show, but I'm teamed up with this fellow, Jacob Pratt, who's Dakota and Anishinaabe descent. He's now living in Los Angeles. He's partaked in as a voice actor on cartoon shows for kids. He does his own videography. He loves flying his drone. He is a spectacular hoop dancer. He attends powwows all over the place. And he's a great composer of music with flute and on stage productions. So Jacob is a up-and-coming star. You got to watch out for this guy, and it's great to have him on board. And then there's Jennifer Brousseau. She's Ojibwe from the Serpent River First Nation near Subway and Manitoulin Island. She's based out of Vancouver. She is also an actor and singer with many other productions under her belt. She does stage work and is also a teacher and an activist here in Vancouver. And what's really been interesting with Jen on set, she has this incredible growing interest in ethnobotany because she's been inflicted with Lyme's disease from a tick bite. And so she's been learning about ethnobotany from the communities where we've been traveling, and many of the remedies that she's found have been helping her health. And so that's really nice to see. And so there's a very large production team. I'll quickly go through them. This is Tracy German, our producer-director. This is her baby. There are many other people involved. Ian Thompson, Karen, Hanson, Sammy, one of our sound guys, camera and sound people all the way down this list. Really, they're working behind the scenes of the camera, and it's their hard work that on set over very many long days that gets this done. And it's really incredible to work with these people. You get to know them. We live together. We're on the road together. We eat together, and so on. Without them, the experience would be much more difficult. And you can notice there are John Elliott, who is Tuscarora descent. He's with us still on season 2. It's great to have Indigenous filmmakers as part of this. Tracy German as well. She has Mi'kmaq and Haudenosaunee ancestry as well. So it's it's like an Indigenous movement here going on within media. So what I'd like to quickly do is, if you haven't seen the series, is quickly run through some of all the episodes. I told Tracy episode 1 has to be in Squamish and has to be alpine archaeology because that's what I do. And so we explored many sites up there, got into the high country. One of the first troubles that we had, I thought Tracy had money for a helicopter. We didn't. So I had to hike the crew up a logging road and sort of tell them and encourage them, oh, it's just another 100 meters. And yeah, my sister can relate to this. I've taken her into the high country as well. But for me, it was an excellent opportunity to focus on the research that I've been doing up in the Alpine and other places for over 20 years now, and look at archaeological sites that are in locations that people would not think there's anything there. And so again, we're changing, getting rid of the misconceptions about people and their ancient past. And so Doing research in the Alpine is very difficult at times because there's snowpack and adverse weather conditions. But you can see when you get up there, it's incredibly beautiful. So episode 1 was, for me, my bias here, it's one of my favorites. So where else did we go? Here's some of the Alpine shots, some of the weather that we encountered, hiking up the road, some of the logistical challenges. This is the big picture up here. We're standing on top of a 7,000-year-old site. That comes from radiocarbon dates from a hearth or fire pit feature associated with microblades, a specific form of technology. But this is in August, and usually there's no snow. But this varies from year to year. And so we managed to get what we needed in that episode and have some incredible scenery in scene 1. Episodes 2 and 3, we went up to the southern Yukon with the White River First Nation. And these episodes focused on the ancient environments that archaeologists refer to as Beringia. And we were at the Little John site, which is northeastern of Yukon College, where he's been working in collaboration with the White River First Nation for many years. And this is one of the oldest sites in Beringia. And so there's the Bering Land Bridge. People came over from Northeast Asia thousands and thousands of years ago. This is one of the oldest sites dating back to those times. And so what was fantastic is to actually get into these excavation units. You can see the various layers. These dark layers are where the cultural deposits are. And associated with these dark layers are animal remains of extinct megafauna, along with various projectile points that are time sensitive. And what was really encouraging to see is the incredible involvement of the White River First Nation in their ancient past. Some of the kids from the community are better excavators than some of the undergrads that I've taught. But what's really incredible about this site is that they have oral history of volcanic eruptions, and we see that in the archaeological record. They have oral history about changing environments and ancient animals walking the land that were 5-10 times size than they are today. And we see that in the archaeology at Little John site. So that was an incredible experience living up there in where the sun never really goes down. It was very difficult to sleep. Norm faces some logistical challenges of his own. This was the site before we arrived. This is the main excavation block of the Little John site. And of course, they get a lot of snow up there. And when it melts, Norm shows up in the late spring, early summer, and this is what he returns to. So he has to drain the pool, or the pit of despair, as he calls it, and to be able to go in and do the systematic work that he wants. And here are just some of the other shots of us excavating, filming, and coming across various other things. This is one of my former BA honor students, Jordan Handley, who's been working at the site for many, many years, helping out with our portable X-ray fluorescence instrument, looking at the differences in the sediments down through the profile of the site, seeing if there are changes, if we can detect changes, environmental changes within the chemistry of the sediments. And these are some ancient bison antiquus, or extinct bison that were twice or 3 times the size as modern buffalo. So moving along, episodes 4 and 5, I sent Jen and Jacob on a solo mission to test their archaeological skills. And so they went all the way up to Richardson Island in the Mackenzie Delta to work with Max Friesen of the University of Toronto. And he has a long-term project of doing salvage archaeology at this site. It's a large two-lay village site that dates to the last 1,000 years that is literally eroding out of the permafrost into the Arctic Ocean. And this, of course, is all due to climate change, the warming temperatures. And they're doing what we call rescue archaeology. And the main component of the site here dates to the last 400 years. And what's really incredible, since many of the artifacts and features have been frozen, literally frozen in time, there's incredible preservation. And so you can see some of the bone, the wood, and stone artifacts here that they're excavating. It gives us incredible insight into the last 500 to 1,000 years of the ancestors of our modern day Inuit in the far north. And here you can see on the beach, these are whale bones eroding out. The Thule, the ancestors of the modern day Inuit, were and still are expert sea mammal hunters. And this site was located at a key intercept point of migrating beluga and other whales. So they had intimate knowledge of their environment. And it's unfortunate that this site is literally melting like ice cream on a hot day into the ocean. And of course, doing archaeological work in the far north is an extreme challenge. The bugs are horrendous. There are polar bears and other things. And food, you're living on Spam and jam and so on. It's a pretty tough go. And so you can see Jacob and Jen here. They quickly bonded with the Inuit folks that were involved on this project. And I think that really helped them and the film crew get through filming these episodes. So moving on, episode 6, we went out to Ontario and we looked at what's referred to as underwater archaeology in the Great Lakes. And this was a great opportunity for me to meet up with an old friend and colleague from McMaster, Lisa Sonnenberg, who's just finished her postdoc at the University of Michigan. And her research, along with others, looked at bathymetric readings or underwater sort of radar and sonar in areas in Lake Huron between the state of Michigan and the province of Ontario. And they were focusing on these ridge lines that are now underwater. And they went down with an underwater drone along with scuba teams themselves. And they started finding these linear arrangements of stones on top of these ridges. And the oral history of many people in this part of the world, the indigenous people, say, well, yeah, we have oral history of these ridges that used to connect this place to that place. And there were lakes on either side. And they refer to them as tunnels, as travelways to get from one place to another. So here's a map of the bathymetric readings of Lake Huron. Here's Georgian Bay. This is a Manitoulin area up here, beautiful part of Ontario. But here, the yellow, these are areas that would have been exposed. Back then, the Great Lakes did not have as much water supply. The water flow was going over more towards the St. Lawrence River. This is about 10,000 years ago. And also, the weight of the glaciers had pressed down on the Earth's crust so much that when the ice melted away, the land bounced back up. And this is what we refer to as isostatic rebound. And what happened, of course, it changed the flow of the water in many different directions. And so this part of Lake Huron the water was much lower than it is today. And here is what they refer to as the Amberley Ridge. And this is where they were finding those linear rock formations. So what's the big deal about rocks in lines? Well, that's a great thing in archaeology, right? You probably heard about the Nazca lines down in Peru and so on. Well, rock lines are all over the place. And archaeologists, we find them, other people find them, and very often we have to say, well, that's not really anything because, we have to look at the context and so on. Anyhow, this is, again, further up north in the subarctic and Arctic. This is a caribou hunting linear feature. And you can see the rocks have been moved in purposeful ways. And you can see this round area here. This is a hunting blind where the hunters would hunker down. And of course, this is along a known caribou migration route. The caribou follow the same route year after year, generation after generation. They're predictable. And of course, people in the ancient past picked up on that. And it was like, okay, where do we set up one of these things? Where is it going to be easy for us to hunt these animals? And then as the caribou would come along here, they don't have really good eyesight. And so they get funneled along these fence walls. And the hunters would hunker down here. And the caribou would walk by, you just jump up and there's your dinner. So, were these hunting features now underwater, but originally created and exposed 10,000 years ago? Well, here's some of the maps that Lisa sent me and agreed that I could use for this evening's talk. Here are the rock line arrangements. And you can see this is where the caribou would come. And here are some of those hunting blinds. And here's some of the photos from underwater, what they look like. Oh, very fine. That's kind of interesting. Some of you may not be convinced. Some of my fellow archaeologists out there kind of rubbing their chins. Well, what Lisa and others did was to core some of the sediments in and around these hunting features, to take samples and bring them back up to the surface, go through them with fine screens, and see what's in there. And this is one of the things that Lisa is really good at, is identifying what we refer to in archaeology as micro-debitage. And people in the ancient past manufactured stone tools. And as you do that, when you're knocking off pieces of a larger rock to create an arrowhead or other implements, there is the shatter, the debris. And this is what turns up within these hunting blinds. And so what do hunters do when you're sitting there waiting for the caribou? You make sure your tools are nice and sharp. And this is the end result. And so I was not convinced at first, but over filming these episodes, I was like, okay, I can jive with this. This is interesting. And nearby, you kind of look at these stone tools. So, well, what are they made out of? And the tool stone in this area of the Great Lakes, it's mostly quartzite. So the next episode, we went and visited a quarry site known as Shaguinda. And this is Pat Julig of Laurentian University, who also taught sessionally here at SFU back in the 90s. He investigated this quarry site up in Manitoulin Island over many, many years. And so Pat, myself, and my co-host, Jen and Jacob, learned flint knapping from Pat Julig. And we found, through experimental archaeology of replicating arrowheads, like this one shown here, that much of the micro-debitage that we produced from making our arrowheads resembled much of the micro-debitage that was being found now underwater for one of these ancient land bridges in Lake Huron. So that was very informative. And so Pat Julig and I are now looking at doing some additional testing to find out the elemental chemistry of these materials through XRF and other processes. And so that'll be exciting research down the road. During this episode as well, this was near Jen's home territory of Serpent River. So she got to spend time within her community. We attended the local powwow and partook in the potato dance. Has anyone done the potato dance? Oh, you got to try it. It's a lot of fun. But it was a great time to just sort of do some interesting archaeology, but again, stress talking to the communities about their oral history and how it meshes with the archaeological investigations that are being done now underwater in Lake Huron. And many of their oral histories speak of these connections between and across the Great Lakes. Episode 8, we got to come back to British Columbia, and another SFU alumnus, Farid Ramtula, who did his PhD at SFU Archaeology, is now faculty at University of Northern BC, was working in conjunction with the Hawkeye Network up on the Central Coast on Calvert Island. And he had the good luck to run a field school up there. So he had an army of students and the strong support of the Hawkeye Network, who have an excellent research base on Calvert Island. And Farid did his PhD on a famous site on the Central Coast known as Namu, and it's a really deep site. If you go to the museum up at SFU, the Burnaby campus, you can see a profile or a section of the site. And that one is only about 2 or 3 meters deep. But Farid chose a site on Calvert Island, and it's over 5 meters deep. And I really encourage you to watch this episode because you can see how incredibly dangerous and kind of scary it is climbing down the ladder, over 5 meters deep. So that's 25. How many feet is that? I don't know. And so he finally hit bottom. And of course, what he wanted to do here was to demonstrate the antiquity of Celtic oral narratives about their ancient past. And this area of the Central Coast is fascinating because I mentioned the glaciers earlier for the Great Lakes. Here on the coast, we had big glaciers as well. And of course, that pressed down here on the mainland. But out on the outer islands, Vancouver Island, Haida Gwaii, essentially it was like a teeter-totter like this. And so the inner coast would have been depressed while the outer coast would have been lifted. And so the sea level history in these locations is dramatically different. The reason why Farad chose this location, it's right on that fulcrum. And the sea level didn't change very much. And so that's why we get these incredible deep shell midden sites, ancient continuous occupation going back well over 10,000 years. And here's a picture of Farad at the bottom. and it's incredible. I did not want to go down there. I felt scared. So here's Farad Remtula. This is Elroy White. I'll talk more about Elroy in a little bit. But this is after dinner at the lodge at Hakai. And the food there was incredibly good. It's like a 5-star chef. And Farad said, this is the only project I've ever worked on where you actually gain weight. Because typically archaeologists, when we go in the field, we you work out every day. And so you get really fit. But this was an incredible demonstration of the very ancient history of Celtic oral narratives. And to expand on that, in episode 9, Elroy White, or Haunius, took us on a tour of the inlets of Celtic territory. We went to Namu, that famous site that I mentioned earlier, Koi River, which is an incredible location where there is active education for Celtic youth. And what this episode really stressed was the more recent oral history of the Celtic nation as it focuses on resource gathering, but also management and the lessons that we can learn from Indigenous cultural knowledge about how to manage fisheries like herring and salmon and so on, that many of these forms of cultural knowledge should be implemented in modern day because our resources are continually stressed all up and down the coast and on the mainland as well. But this was, for me, one of my favorite episodes because it was the entire cast was Indigenous people. There was myself, Jen, Jacob, and Elroy. Elroy was the expert archaeologist. He did his MA at SFU Archaeology as well. And his MA thesis is still a really good read. He titled it The Products of My Ancestors' Labor in reference to fish traps in Celtic territory. And just some of the incredible scenery up on the Central Coast. Again, in this episode, this is an old house post that's still standing up one of the inlets. Here's the Koi River, where the ongoing cultural education is happening. And this is the old site of Namu. This is the old cannery that sits on top of the site. And we went back there to try and relocate some of the old excavations that Roy Carlson did in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, but everything had been dramatically overgrown, and the old cannery has been long abandoned. It was kind of like going to a ghost town. And so for episode 10, to move things along here, we went out to southern Alberta, to Blackfoot territory, and visited the very famous site Head Smashed In. It's a World Heritage Site. If you ever have a chance to go there, or if you've been there, it's a great place, good to go. But the provincial archaeologist, Jack Brink, has done research here for many decades. Tracy German identified him as the expert on the site. We also talked with Reg Crowshoe, who was a Blackfoot elder We got to sit in his teepee for many hours, share stories, and learn about Head Smashed In from a Blackfoot perspective. But the main thing that he stressed to us was the cultural protocols about hunting buffalo and the relationship that the Blackfoot have with these animals. And really, that is a theme that goes throughout the entire series, the relationships that Indigenous people have with the plants and the animals of the natural world. And so what made another fun thing about this episode was Jacob and the film crew got to use a drone. And so they were flying this drone. It was buzzing around. It sounds like a giant mosquito. And they dropped it off the cliff here of Head Smashed In. So those of you who don't know how this works, this is a very large cliff. It's about a 20, 30 meter drop. In behind it, I'll show more pictures as we go along, there's a huge gathering area. And this is where the Blackfoot and other people would funnel the buffalo with drive lanes, similar to what we saw underwater in Lake Huron. And they would direct them. They would section off part of the herd. They wouldn't take the whole herd. They would drive them over this cliff, and the buffalo would drop down to their deaths. Or if they didn't die from the fall, there would be people waiting for them to finish them off. And this is a communal hunt and provided a huge amount of resources for people to live throughout the fall and winter months. And so it's incredible use of the landscape, knowing the knowledge of animals and their behavior, and has been in use for about 6,000 years. So here's Jack giving us the tour. This is the gathering basin in behind the site. Here's some of the, we're standing on top of some of the rocks, which would be anchors to pile up bush and other material to aid in funneling the buffalo over that precipice that is known as Head Smashed In. And just a note, you may have heard this as a buffalo jump head smashed in. Well, buffalo don't jump willingly over a cliff. They had to be driven. And so where the head smash comes in is actually it's the oral history of the very first communal hunt here, where a young boy was at the bottom of the cliff and he didn't know the buffalo were coming. And one of the buffalo, as it came down, landed on top of him. And of course, his head got smashed in. So that's where the head smashed in comes from. It's not the buffalo getting their head smashed in. It refers to an unfortunate young boy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here are some modern buffalo that we got to film. This is a ranch just over in Saskatchewan. We did go to another site, Bodo, which is Alberta-Saskatchewan border, but that never materialized as an episode. But if you're ever out on the prairies and see a rock like this, it's very worn and shiny. This is a buffalo rubbing stone. And again, this is how Indigenous people of the plains observed the behaviors of the animals that they were in tune with. The buffalo, of course, they get itchy and scratchy, and so they would wallow around these rocks, rubbing themselves up against it to scratch themselves. And so knowing where these were, those, of course, other locations other than Head Smashed In would be good places to hunt the buffalo. And of course, we weren't filming all the time. We did have time off in between episodes. Depending on locations, some of the locations had great spots. We got to play pool and hang out. Here's Jacob doing a hoop dance at Head Smashed In on Aboriginal Day. Here's Liam taking a break while filming. Some of the scenes that we shot would go on for 45 minutes, and you can imagine holding a camera without a tripod. And so his back got very sore. And one of the things, those of you who've seen all the episodes, there's a friendly competition between Jen and Jacob in applying their knowledge and skills in each episode. And this is an example of Jacob's stone and brush that was constructed as part of the drive complex. And Jen and Jacob have these competitions throughout each episode, and then I judge who did better. And in this episode, Jen bribed me with some chocolate. And of course, there are some bad days on set, and I have to put the crew back in order. Sometimes I have to use force. But moving along, episode 11, I was really looking forward to this episode because we went all the way out to Labrador to work with Scott Nielsen here of Memorial University. And he's working with the Sheshuche, their Innu nation in Labrador. And what was incredible about this location was the oral history that they have of the ocean front, the beach, being much further inland than it is now. And so what Scott's research is doing inland of Labrador is finding these old beach ridges that are now well over 100 kilometers away from modern shoreline. And so he's looking at ancient environments and how the ancestors of the Innu reacted to changing sea levels. Here and in the Arctic, our sea levels are going up. Out there, the ocean is retreating because, again, the glaciers press down on the land and the land is still rebounding. And so this has been a process that's been going on for thousands of years. And so along all these beach ridges, Scott is finding archaeological sites. And so it's an incredible environment. If you go to Labrador or if you go to northern BC, it looks exactly the same. It's this continuous boreal forest, and it's really something unique about Canada. And just to give you an idea of, here's one of these ridges. There's a drop. That was oceanfront 4,000 years ago. And so you survey along these ridges, and that's where you find the sites, projectile points and other things. And so Scott goes out and excavates these with the consent and approval of the Sheshuche. And it was really incredible what Scott also does in the community, the reserve. There's one of these beach ridges. And of course, many First Nations communities need housing. And so before they build a new house, Scott goes and does an excavation on where those houses are going to be. And of course, that involves local community members, and they get to experience their ancient past firsthand before the construction of the house happens. Jacob turned into a star here because he was flying his drone. It was an incredible experience for these young kids. And I made the mistake of sharing my lunch with them one day, and I didn't get any of my food, but that was fine. They were happy. So while we were in Labrador, we also went down a little further east, even from Sheshuche. We went out to the coast. And this is where Dr. Lisa Rankin of Memorial University was working at the Double Mur site. And this is out at Riglet. There's a very small community in Labrador. And this excavation that she's been doing over many years is a historical site. It's where it's more recent in time. It's about 200 years old. And it's really interesting. These houses that they're excavating, they're a mixture of European and First Nations materials. And there's evidence of men intermarrying into the coastal Labrador Inuit communities happening around this time. And so what's really intriguing is the materials inside the house are the Inuit women doing their things, and outside the house are the European men artifacts. So it kind of reminds me when my wife gets mad at me, I have to leave the house. So, but her research is really interesting because this is the southernmost Inuit community in Canada. And seeing the cultural interaction within these houses. Here's a completely excavated one. This is the floor, stone-lined floor. You can see the entrance over here. There are fire pits, sleeping areas, and benches, and so on. This takes many, many years of hard work. And Lisa is still working at this site and others to get an idea of this regional interaction between Europeans and the Inuit hundreds of years ago. So here's a quick rundown of all the episodes and where we've gone from coast to coast to coast across the entire country. And each episode, of course, has a theme. It has a lead archaeologist. However, being on the road, sitting in airports, going on boat rides, waiting for the crew to set up in lab scenes or elsewhere, this takes a lot of time. Each episode takes about a week and a half to film, and that gets boiled down to 22 minutes of actual airtime. And so it's interesting how it all gets edited down into these episodes. About the website, wildarchaeology.com, there is added content that you can check out as well. Scenes that did not make it into each episode and other material. And being in these communities was a great experience. This is in Riglet, where I'm having caribou stew. And I said to these kids, "Do you want something?" And they said, "Giant cookies." I said, "You don't want caribou stew?" And they said, "No." But they eat that stuff all the time. We had just gotten back from a very long day of filming, and so I needed this very healthy food. But of course, they wanted a treat. And so, but for me, I got a little teary-eyed because it reminded me of being home. And here's my daughter, Hera. There's my wife, Robin, on the little roller coaster, and some more of my family up in Squamish. And when we're in these communities, it always reminded me of home and the ties that I have to my family and my history. And so we're very fortunate in going into these communities for them to put up with us, to share their history, and really, all of them opened their arms and welcomed us, and that was very encouraging. And of course, Jen and Jacob and I have formed a very strong bond. We look out for each other and take care of each other while we're away from home. I should also note, Wild Archaeology is one of the few TV shows out there that also airs in First Nations language. Jacob and his aunt did voiceover in Dakota, and I am thinking of talking to my cousins who speak Squamish to maybe do this as well. And so I think that would be fantastic to start creating these bridges with various First Nations communities across the country. But the people I really want to thank are the people of the communities throughout each episode. You can see there's a big long list of names here. I can't go through them all right now. But it's without these folks, with these communities, without their consent, their participation, none of this would happen, and it would not be as interesting as it has turned out to be. And so big thanks to all of these people. And so when is season 2 coming out? Well, we did filming for 4 episodes this past summer. More filming is coming for the spring, summer, and fall next year, where we need to do 9 episodes. Then after all that filming, there's another year post-production. So this image is a little bit of a sneak peek. This is me along a grease trail up in northern British Columbia. And here's some of the other panoramic photos of locations that we've been to through filming so far. This is up at Babine First Nation, northern BC. This is up in Seashelt on the Sunshine Coast. This is again in southern Ontario at the Serpent Mound site. And so we're exploring different areas, different archaeologists, going to different communities. And again, it's been encouraging with the start of filming for season 2 that communities know about this show now. And it's really great. They're like, we want you here. And that's what we like to hear. And so thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too long. I guess Andrew will field, President Petter will field questions. Wojcika.
How does this work? There we go. Perfect. So this is your chance to offer comments or questions of Rudy. As I say, there'll be a less formal chance afterwards, but we have some time here, and you got a wonderful overview of the first season, and boy, I'm really looking forward to the next one. But I guess it's going to be a while to get it all done. But Heather back there has a microphone, so if you can indicate if you'd like to ask a question or offer a comment that you'd like Rudy to respond to, just put your hand up and Heather will come around. Someone has to be first. Right back here, there's a gentleman who put up his hand, and then we have Deanna up here.
I think I could have listened to you for another hour. You have great delivery, and it's humor. Excellent, just excellent.
Thank you.
Your first review just came in.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And it's a lot of practice that I've been teaching now since 2009. And when you have to do a 3 or 4 hour lecture, it takes some work and skill to keep it interesting. So some of my students are here, and I hope they share your views.
And some of your colleagues are here, like the next questioner, Deanna.
That's right. And on whether it's in a conversation one-to-one or in a room like this, I'm so proud to be your colleague, and I just really am so grateful for the kind of work that you're doing. And my question really comes as somebody who teaches stories. I am very comfortable as a literary scholar to repeat what nations say to my students, that we've been here since the world began. And I have no conflict with that. I don't consider myself a scientist. Instead, I think about the value of stories. And you as a scientist talk about the land bridge and Beringia and all those kinds of details that fade to me into like mythic time, like the time before, when animals could speak and people could speak to them. And I just wonder how you coincide those two parts of yourself and your knowledge and the kinds of interests that you have. Mm-hmm. How do you explain that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's actually a question I asked in a recent PhD defense, because the candidate had written that a certain group down in the United States had stated they had been there since time immemorial, whereas the archaeological, the linguistic, the genetic evidence, all these different other scientific lines of inquiry point to a totally different story. And that's something that's very difficult for archaeologists to cope with. And in some areas, it's there's friction, but in other places, there is synergy. And I do talk about some of the synergies in my dissertation, and in Squamish, we have this a time that we refer to as Swachwiam. I hope I pronounced that right, or close. Okay. That it is a time that in Squamish history that is so far back that it's barely remembered. And for me, that's sort of a rough translation of time immemorial. It's such ancient history that only few people know and understand it. And those stories are passed down to very select few. And so the challenge is for archaeologists, and this is something I want to do as I continue my research in Squamish territory, is start looking at place names and the connections between place names and tracing the stories of the transformers or these large narratives that we have, and to see what is the archaeological signature of that. And so this gets back to the philosophy of Indigenous archaeology, that by considering cultural knowledge, it expands and offers new avenues of research rather than shutting them down.
Great. We have a question right around here from a young member of the audience. Oh, right here, yep. What's your question?
Why did you choose to do archaeology, and what was your favorite location?
Good questions.
You want to restate the question, Rudy?
Why did I choose to do archaeology, and what was my favorite location?
Two great questions in one.
When I originally went to Capilano, I wanted to be a geologist. I wanted to look at rocks. And I didn't do well in some of the hardcore math. So I fell back onto anthropology and archaeology, which I found even more interesting. And the faculty there and at SFU were open to me exploring Squamish cultural knowledge. And so that was a really beneficial thing. So for me getting into archaeology, it was looking into Squamish Nation, ancient history. And in the season 1, I guess my favorite, other than filming in Squamish, my favorite location probably would have been the Central Coast. Traveling with Elroy across his territory, because I could really relate to the way he was talking about his history, about his territory. And it was kind of like listening to myself in a mirror, but I didn't have to do all the talking. It was him.
In the Heiltsuk First Nations territory.
Yes.
Great. There's a gentleman up back here with his hand up, and then we'll come back over here.
Oh, hi there. Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. I wanted to ask, I don't know how much archaeology relates to people. Of course it does in some fashion, and politics. For instance, the archaeological findings would be Stone Age findings of the Paleolithic or Neolithic peoples at the time. And this relates to certain types of production, hunting, gathering, and certain types of political formations, the tribal nation. And today, to admit where I'm coming from, I'm against the treaty process because treaties are made between nations, and although Canada is a nation, the villages that they make treaties with are not nations. I'm wondering if I could get rescued in any fashion from science, because you would know what a nation is.
Can archaeology shine light on what is a nation?
That's a good question, and a difficult one to answer, really. In conventional archaeology, we had sort of stages of culture, and we had chiefdoms, we had incipient states, nations and empires. And those are ways to define communities and cultures in various areas of the world. But in the past, in archaeology, when we look at the archaeology of North America, archaeologists did refer to many areas across the continent as sort of Stone Age societies or Neolithic societies. But as research has gone on in multiple areas across the continent, we are finding evidence that there were city-states here, there were empires, there were complex cultures. And you look at an area here on the Northwest Coast, well, there's no monumental architecture. In other areas, there's not this. That's not to say that those communities in those places had complex and interesting technology, adaptations, and so on. So we have to be a little more relative when we look at different cultures in different areas over different time periods. And so much of the archaeology in North America is understudied. Archaeology in British Columbia has only been going on in a serious fashion for over 50 years. When we compare that to the American Southwest, where we have large cities, or Mesoamerica, the history of archaeology there has been going on for well over a century. So for me, that's the challenge of archaeology, we have a lot more to find out. And so, and the other thing is, I think we're moving away from those older ways of classifying people and cultures.
Okay, there's a question here from Shiraz.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I come from Tanzania, and the first time I heard about archaeology was the Olduvai Gorge, where the first man was found. And then I learned about archaeology through David Suzuki's program, Nature. He has done quite a few of archaeological series. Now yours. So I've grown from Queens, Canada to Indigenous Canada. And I'm celebrating Indigenous Canada 150 plus by reading 50 books, watching 50 movies, and listening to 50 songs of Indigenous people. But I have a problem. I have no problem starting the books, because you can start with children's books and then continue, or picture books. Yep. But I was wondering just now whether I should start watching films. I've seen some films, but whether to recommend people to watch your series as a beginning and then follow up with the most recent, the other movies, because we need 50 of them at least. Yeah. So yours is 12 already. Sure.
Yeah.
and then songs, but it's one of each. So I have two questions. One is, why do you use the word wild archaeology? And the second question is, where should I fit your programs in my 50 films?
Okay, yeah, good questions. And in terms of finding more, getting to your 50, there's another show called Coyote Science. I'm going to be on that as well. There's another show coming out soon that I and many other Indigenous archaeologists are on. It's based on Mann's book, 1491. That's a very large production. But also a lot of the work that Jen and Jacob and others are doing. And so this is really growing. And it reminds me of a movie that I show in my classes at SFU called Real Injun, that looks at the history of Indigenous people in cinema. And that should be required watching as well, because it talks about the misconceptions and the way Indigenous people have been viewed and portrayed through media. In terms of wild archaeology, I had no choice in that.
Marketing.
Yeah. That was Tracy German, the producer-director, who she just said, we're going to call it this. And I was like, all right. So it stuck. And yeah, and sorry, your second question was... oh.
You kind of answered it already.
Yeah. Maybe not the first one, but I think maybe solid top 20.
We have a question right up here. Heather, if you can bring the microphone around.
Thank you for the presentation and this very pretty landscape and the photography and everything. And it shows that the histories of the past of thousands of years. My question is, what role you think archaeology can play actively to preserve nature in an ongoing forward, on a forward basis? Mm-hmm. How could we contribute to that?
Right. That's a very good question, and it's something that I've dealt with throughout my academic and consulting career. When I finished my undergrad, or while I was doing my undergrad at SFU, I got into consulting archaeology, or cultural resource management, and it was a great way to make money because I wasn't in class every day, and so I could go out and work and earn some extra money as a starving student. And back then, CRM archaeology is when there are developments in British Columbia, there's legislation, the Heritage Conservation Act, that protects archaeological sites. And so prior to logging or new highway, there's archaeological assessments. And so I was one guy in a crew, and we would go out and record sites, and they would be protected. And I thought back then, wow, okay, I'm saving this. But then I quickly realized everything around the sites that got developed. And so there were just these little pockets. And so this is when I got involved in land use planning. And the perspective changed in my head, where culture and heritage can be useful in not only protecting these small dots on maps, but protecting larger areas. Because when we consider not just the archaeological sites, but the cultural knowledge associated with the landscape around those sites, that they're indeed connected to a much larger place. And so in the land use plan that we did in the Squamish Nation in the early 2000s, did that. We protected large areas of old growth forest and other parts of our territory that are off limits to logging and any other sort of development. And so that's the perspective I brought forward even more when I did my PhD, was looking at the connections between sites and places through the elemental chemistry of stone tools. And so it's using the tools, the scientific techniques of archaeology, and combining that with cultural knowledge that we can protect the environment even more, but also looking at examples like Elroy in the fish traps, the cultural knowledge about, well, if we're still going to harvest salmon, let's do it sustainably. If we're going to do various other things, let's look at cultural knowledge as an option to manage, maintain, preserve those things.
One final question before there's one right over here before we conclude the formal part of the evening, and then we'll have a chance for a bit of informal discussion afterwards. Right back there.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful trip down memory lane. I've been an enthusiast of archaeology and the policy for many, many years. When you were speaking about the site up north, it brought to mind the Ozette site. And that brought to mind my own experience. I live in Gabriel Island in Snuneymuxw territory. And there's been a lot of talk recently about clam gardens. And I'm wondering if there are any archaeological sites possible in your series around the exploration of clam gardens.
Yes, clam gardens are fascinating features. For those of you who don't know, it's the alteration of the intertidal zone to make productive clam habitat. And so these linear rock features would be built up and maintained over generations. And the clams inside these gardens grow nice and big and would be easy to dig up. And they were actually cultural property that were guarded. And there is a number of archaeologists all up and down the coast looking at clam gardens right now. And there's been a great article, I believe Dana Leposki, SFU Archaeology, who was one of the co-authors. They did the first scientific dating of one of these clam gardens, and it was over 1,000 years old. But what is really interesting about clam gardens, again, it's similar to fish traps. It was the purposeful alteration of the environment. It's aquaculture. And it was sustainable. It was environmentally sound. So it's another form of cultural knowledge that we should be using in modern day, because there are shellfish farms, just like there are fish farms and other things here on our coast. And so, again, it's looking at cultural knowledge on how can we apply this in modern day so that everyone benefits.
Well, like you, I want to join with others who've expressed appreciation to Rudy and share the pride that Deanne and others expressed to have colleagues and scholars like Rudy at SFU. And Rudy, what I love about your talk is it really brings to the fore the values that I hope we as a university are trying to pursue more generally. You know, when we talk about an engaged university, we're really pushing back on the old traditional view of a university, which traditional universities looked at the outside world as the subjects of their research, not as sources of knowledge, not as places where the university can learn and gain sustenance and knowledge. And your research is all about finding knowledge outside the university and bringing it into the university and sharing it with the public. And the other thing that I so often say, of course, historically, universities in Canada excluded Indigenous peoples. They couldn't come to university. And thankfully, that has changed. And the point that I think Rudy's presentation points out is not only is that hopefully to the benefit of Indigenous people and students, but it's hugely to the benefit of Canada generally, to have this knowledge, to learn about things we never would have found out about except through the teachings of Indigenous people, is such a privilege. And so I really thank you for that. I also want you to know that we as a university are striving, not imperfectly, to be an instrument for reconciliation. And next week, in fact, we'll be receiving a report from our Aboriginal Reconciliation Council, which has done much consultation as to how we can do even more to indigenize the university, to have the university be an instrument for this kind of research and for the processes of reconciliation. That'll take place on Monday up on the campus, and I hope it will propel us to do even more and to support scholars like Rudy and others to do even more as well. So thank you so much for coming tonight. I encourage you to look on the SFU Public Square website for future faculty lectures. In fact, I can give you a heads up on the date for the next President's Faculty Lecture will be on January 31st, right here in this room. And award-winning communications professor Yuji Zhao, creator of the Global Communication Double MA degree program, which is quite a remarkable program, will be here. And I also encourage you to look for other events that take place, because of course we are trying very much to reach out and share with the community and also to benefit from our relationship with the community through this kind of engagement. So thank you for being here, and please join me in a very warm and appreciative thank you to Dr. Rudy Wang.